It was a quiet afternoon in a small suburban neighborhood. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and children were playing in the streets, riding their bikes and running after each other. Among them was a young boy around 12 years old, full of energy and laughter. He loved to play outside, exploring every corner of his street, talking to neighbors, and enjoying the freedom that comes with being a child. He was carefree, innocent, and curious about the world around him. That day, he had decided to ride his bike a little further than usual. He pedaled down the street, feeling the wind on his face, laughing as he turned corners and waved at the people he knew. He didn't notice the way some adults were watching him with suspicion. One neighbor had seen him near a parked car and thought he was causing trouble. It was an innocent mistake, just a child exploring. But it caught the attention of someone who was ready to overreact. A police officer, a man in his 40s with a stern face and a short temper, had been patrolling the area. He had a reputation for being strict, and some people even whispered that he sometimes took his job too seriously. That afternoon, he saw the boy riding near the parked car and assumed he was up to no good. Without asking questions or observing carefully, he decided to act. He parked his patrol car and walked toward the boy, his steps heavy and deliberate. The boy didn't notice the officer at first. He was too busy spinning his bike wheels and enjoying the sun. When the officer finally reached him, he spoke in a loud, commanding voice that startled the boy. "Hey, stop right there!" The boy froze. He had never seen this officer before, and the tone made him nervous. He didn't know what he had done wrong. He tried to explain, but the words didn't come out fast enough. The officer grabbed the boy's arm, and in that moment the boy realized he was in serious trouble. The officer decided to punish him in a way that seemed extreme for a child. Without thinking about the fear and confusion he was causing, he tied the boy to a nearby pole. The boy struggled, twisting and turning, but the ropes were tight and unforgiving. Tears began to form in his eyes, not only from fear but also from the shock of being treated so harshly for something he didn't understand. Neighbors began to notice. Some came out of their homes curious and concerned. They whispered to each other, asking why the officer was doing this. A few brave souls approached the officer, questioning his actions, but he waved them off, insisting he was in charge and that the boy needed to learn a lesson. The boy's heart was pounding. He felt small and helpless, tied to the pole, unable to move or defend himself. He looked around for someone who could help him, anyone who could explain why this was happening. Some children from the neighborhood watched from a distance, scared and unsure whether they should run or tell an adult. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare that he couldn't wake up from. As minutes passed, the tension in the air grew. The neighbors whispered and murmured, some taking out their phones to record the incident. The officer, seemingly proud of his authority, didn't notice how quickly the situation was escalating. The boy's family had not yet arrived, and the child was left alone, feeling the weight of fear pressing down on him. The boy tried to stay calm. He reminded himself that someone would come, that adults who cared would notice and help. He thought about his parents, imagining them rushing down the street, their faces filled with worry. But as he struggled, the officer continued to stand over him, strict and unyielding, giving no sign that he would release him soon. The neighbors' voices began to grow louder, some angry, some pleading. A woman shouted that the boy was only a child, that he hadn't done anything wrong. Others echoed her, their words filled with concern and frustration. The officer finally turned to them, raising his hand as if to silence the crowd, but his expression did little to calm the growing tension. The boy's fear mixed with confusion. He didn't understand why the world around him had suddenly changed from a place of play and laughter to one of fear and danger. He wished he could disappear, to be back at home, safe in his room where no one could hurt him. But he was stuck, tied to the pole, visible to everyone, and completely exposed. Hours seemed to pass like minutes. The video taken by one of the neighbors began circulating online. People across the neighborhood and eventually the city saw the image of the boy tied to the pole, his face a mixture of fear, tears, and bewilderment. The story began to spread quickly, sparking outrage. Viewers couldn't understand why a child would be treated this way. Comments poured in, expressing anger, disbelief, and concern. Many called for immediate action, demanding that the boy be released and the officer held accountable. Back at the scene, the officer started to feel the pressure. He could see the tension building, the murmurs turning into angry shouts and more people gathering. Some were local residents, others drawn by the sound of commotion. The boy's cries grew softer, not because he was calming down, but because he felt exhausted and scared. His small body trembled with the weight of the ropes and the fear that gripped him. The officer seemed conflicted. He had believed he was doing the right thing, enforcing discipline and asserting authority. But as the crowd grew and the neighbors' anger became undeniable, he realized that the situation was spiraling out of his control. Still, pride and fear of admitting wrongdoing held him back. The boy remained tied, a living symbol of an overreaction that had gone too far. Meanwhile, the boy's mind wandered. He thought about his friends, about how they would be worried and confused if they saw this. He imagined telling them that he had been tied to a pole by a police officer, and the disbelief he would see in their eyes. He tried to make sense of it, to understand why someone meant to protect children could act with such harshness. The thought made him sad and angry, a mix of emotions that was hard for a 12-year-old to process. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. The neighborhood felt different now, charged with tension and worry. The boy's parents were on their way, having heard about the incident through neighbors and phone calls. They were frantic, driving as fast as they could, hoping to reach him before the situation worsened. Their hearts were heavy with fear, imagining their child tied to a pole alone and vulnerable. As the boy waited, he felt a small sense of hope. He knew that help was coming, that there were people who cared about him. Even in the midst of fear, that hope kept him breathing, kept him alert, and kept him from giving up. He thought about how brave he needed to be, how he had to stay calm until someone arrived to untie him and explain what was happening. The scene on the street had become chaotic, yet strangely focused. Neighbors stood at a safe distance, watching and recording, unable to intervene directly but desperate for justice. The boy tied to the pole was the center of attention, and his courage in remaining still despite fear was remarkable. It was a quiet display of bravery, unnoticed by many but powerful in its own way. People began calling the authorities, other officers, and local media. The story was gaining momentum, and it was clear that this incident would not be forgotten. The boy's situation had become more than just a local misunderstanding. It was a symbol of the importance of fairness, patience, and care, especially when dealing with children. Through it all, the boy stayed as calm as he could. He focused on breathing, on imagining his parents arriving, and on holding on to the hope that he would soon be free. Each minute felt like an hour, but he reminded himself that he was not alone. The voices of neighbors, the rustling of leaves, the distant sounds of approaching cars, all of it signaled that the world outside the ropes was still moving, still alive, and still capable of kindness. This incident, while frightening and unfair, marked the beginning of a story that would capture the attention of many. It was the first step in a journey where courage, justice, and unexpected heroes would come into play. For now, the boy remained tied to the pole, scared but holding on to hope, the center of a storm that was only beginning to unfold. The boy remained tied to the pole, and as time passed, more neighbors came out of their homes. People were talking in low voices at first, unsure of what was happening, and some were frightened to intervene. But soon the whispers turned into shouts and questions. How could a police officer do this to a child? Why was the boy tied like an animal when all he had done was ride his bike? The sense of injustice grew, and the crowd started to gather, a mix of adults, parents, and a few children watching from a distance. Some neighbors tried to speak to the officer, asking him to untie the boy. They spoke politely at first, hoping that reason would guide his actions. But the officer's tone was firm, almost cold. He insisted that the boy needed to learn a lesson, and that he was in control. The tension between the officer and the crowd increased. People began recording videos on their phones, capturing every moment. They wanted evidence of what was happening, proof that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. The boy's parents had been called, and they were rushing toward the scene. Their hearts pounded with worry, fear, and anger. They couldn't understand how something so cruel could happen in their quiet neighborhood. As they drove, they imagined their child tied to a pole, scared, confused, and helpless. Every red light and slow-moving car felt like an eternity, and their minds were filled with a mix of rage and desperation. As the crowd grew, so did the voices. People shouted that the boy had done nothing wrong, that he was just a child, and that the officer's actions were unacceptable. Some neighbors tried to intervene directly, asking the officer to loosen the ropes or untie the boy immediately, but he stood firm, unwilling to back down. The scene had transformed from a minor incident into a heated standoff between authority and community. The boy, meanwhile, felt the weight of the ropes and the eyes of the crowd on him. He could hear whispers and shouts, some kind and comforting, some angry and demanding. His heart raced and his mind swirled with confusion. He didn't understand why this was happening, why someone who was supposed to protect him would cause so much fear. He thought about his friends and how they would react if they saw him now. He imagined their shock and disbelief, and it made him feel both small and brave at the same time. The neighborhood children who had been playing nearby were watching from behind fences and windows. Some of them cried, unable to comprehend the scene. Others stayed silent, unsure whether to run home or alert an adult. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of fear, anger, and concern, as everyone tried to make sense of what was unfolding before their eyes. People began contacting local media and posting videos online. Within minutes, the incident spread beyond the neighborhood. The video showed a frightened boy tied to a pole, his small body trembling, surrounded by a crowd of neighbors demanding answers. Social media erupted with outrage and comments poured in, expressing disbelief and calling for immediate action. The story was no longer just a local concern. It had become a topic of national attention. The boy's parents finally arrived, their faces pale and tense, eyes filled with worry. They ran to him, shouting his name and calling for him to hold on. Seeing them brought a wave of relief, but the rope still held him fast. They shouted at the officer to untie him, but he hesitated, caught between his own pride and the mounting pressure from the crowd. The parents' voices grew louder, more demanding and more desperate. The boy tried to calm them, telling them he was okay, but his words were small and fragile against the storm of emotions around him. The neighbors stood together, forming a protective circle around the boy and his family. They demanded answers and accountability. Some were shaking with anger, others with fear, but all were united in their concern for the child. The sense of community was strong, as everyone realized that protecting the boy was more important than anything else. They were ready to support his family, to ensure that justice was served and that such an incident would not happen again. The officer began to realize the gravity of the situation. The boy's parents were pleading, the crowd was growing louder, and the media attention was spreading. He could feel the weight of public scrutiny pressing down on him. He had acted out of a desire to assert authority, but now he understood that his actions were being judged by a larger audience. The tension was palpable, and he had to decide whether to continue holding the boy or to release him. Meanwhile, the boy tried to make sense of everything. He thought about how quickly a simple afternoon had turned into a frightening ordeal. He remembered riding his bike, feeling free and happy, and now he was tied to a pole, surrounded by shouting adults, unable to move. It was confusing, and yet he felt a small spark of hope knowing that people cared enough to speak up for him. That hope kept him going, gave him strength to endure, and reminded him that he was not alone. The parents, desperate to protect their child, spoke to the neighbors and media, explaining what had happened and urging calm while demanding immediate action. They were careful to speak clearly, to make sure their message was heard, and to prevent the situation from becoming more dangerous. Their voices carried the weight of love and fear, resonating with everyone who was watching. The crowd continued to grow, now including people from nearby streets who had heard the commotion. They came to support the boy and his family, to witness what was happening, and to demand justice. Some brought blankets and water, trying to comfort the boy and keep him safe. Others helped document the situation, taking photos and videos to ensure there was a record of the event. The neighborhood had transformed from a quiet, ordinary place into a center of attention, a scene of tension, care, and community action. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The boy's hands were sore, his arms tired from struggling against the ropes. His legs ached and his back pressed against the cold pole. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to focus on breathing and imagining a safe place where he could be free. He thought about the faces of his parents, the voices of neighbors, and the hope that someone would step in soon to release him. That hope was a lifeline, keeping him alert, brave, and ready to face whatever came next. As the afternoon wore on, the situation became a lesson in community, courage, and advocacy. The boy's fear was undeniable, but the response of those around him showed that people could rise together to protect the vulnerable. The neighbors' determination to ensure the boy's safety was inspiring. Even those who were initially hesitant to intervene found themselves drawn into action, supporting the parents, documenting the scene, and speaking out against injustice. The boy's story was no longer just about him. It was about the importance of standing up when something is wrong, about the power of community to protect its members, and about the responsibility of adults to care for children. Each voice in the crowd added to the chorus demanding fairness and compassion. Each action, whether small or large, contributed to a growing sense of accountability. By the time evening approached, the tension had not fully lifted, but the sense of hope had grown stronger. The boy remained tied, but he was no longer alone. He had his parents beside him, neighbors surrounding him, and the knowledge that the world beyond the street was aware of what was happening. The first part of the ordeal had ended with the community rallying around him, ready to ensure that justice would follow, and that no child would have to endure such fear without support. The boy, though exhausted and frightened, understood that he had witnessed something important. The world could be unfair, but people who cared could make a difference. He held on to that thought, imagining the moment when the ropes would finally be removed, when he would be free to return home, safe in the arms of those who loved him. The incident had shaken him, but it had also shown him the power of community, compassion, and courage, setting the stage for what would come next. The boy was still tied to the pole, the ropes pressing into his small wrists, his arms aching, and his mind spinning with fear and confusion. He had been there for what felt like hours, though in reality it was only a part of the afternoon. The crowd around him had grown larger, neighbors and concerned adults talking, shouting, and pleading with the officer to let him go. The atmosphere was tense, thick with anxiety and frustration. As the situation continued, word of the incident began to spread beyond the neighborhood. Videos posted online caught the attention of people far away, many of whom were shocked by what they saw. The image of a young boy tied to a pole by a law enforcement officer stirred emotions across the city. People started sharing the story on social media, calling for the boy's release and accountability for the officer. The outrage was building, but amid it all, there was hope that help would come. Far away from the neighborhood, two men who had spent their lives standing for strength and justice were scrolling through social media when they came across the video. John Cena, known for his courage and determination, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, admired for his strength and compassion, both stopped as they saw the boy tied to the pole. The fear in his eyes, the helplessness of his small frame, and the injustice of the moment struck a chord in both of them. They could not sit quietly while a child was suffering. Without hesitation, they decided to step in. Their arrival was not quiet or subtle. When they drove into the neighborhood, the presence of two famous figures quickly drew attention. People on the street recognized them immediately, and the whispers and chatter turned into excited murmurs and awe. Cameras from local media, neighbors, and onlookers captured every moment as the two men walked toward the scene, their faces serious and determined. Their very presence brought a sense of safety and hope to the boy who, even tied to the pole, felt a glimmer of relief. John Cena approached first, his expression calm but firm. He knelt slightly to be at the boy's level, speaking in a gentle, reassuring voice. The boy's heart beat faster, a mix of fear and hope as he realized someone who could truly help him was there. Cena's voice carried kindness but also authority, and it reached the boy's ears in a way that immediately made him feel a little safer. The Rock followed, moving to stand beside Cena, his towering figure casting a shadow over the scene but also providing a protective barrier. He scanned the crowd, the officer, and the surroundings, assessing the situation with care. The boy looked up at him, feeling a strange mix of awe and relief. Here were two people who were larger than life, yet they came not for fame but to help a child who needed them. The neighbors' reactions were immediate. Many stepped back slightly, realizing that the presence of Cena and The Rock shifted the dynamic. Even the officer seemed taken aback, his confidence wavering as he saw two men with enormous public influence standing firmly in front of the boy. The situation, once chaotic, now had a new layer of seriousness. People could sense that change was coming, that justice and compassion were about to be restored. Cena spoke directly to the officer, his voice steady and calm, but leaving no room for argument. He reminded the officer that the child was not at fault. that tying him to a pole was unnecessary and cruel, and that the public attention on the incident would demand accountability. The words were measured, but they carried weight. The officer, feeling the pressure, hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The boy could feel the tension shift slightly, hope rising in his chest as he sensed that someone powerful was advocating for him. The Rock turned his attention to the crowd, addressing the neighbors and bystanders. He spoke of the importance of protecting children, of standing up against injustice, and of ensuring that fear did not control the lives of the vulnerable. His voice was deep, commanding attention yet filled with warmth and understanding. The people listened, nodding, realizing that their concerns were valid and that action was coming from someone who truly cared. Meanwhile, the boy tried to absorb everything happening around him. His heart raced and tears threatened to fall, but he held them back. He watched the two men, his heroes in that moment, and felt a sense of safety he had not felt since the officer had tied him to the pole. The rope still dug into his wrists and he still felt scared. But the presence of Cena and the Rock made him believe that he would not remain in danger for much longer. As the conversation between the men and the officer continued, the neighbors supported the boy in small ways. Some handed him water, others whispered reassuring words, while a few simply stood nearby, offering silent protection. The atmosphere shifted from chaos to a mixture of tension and hope. The crowd began to understand that real change was possible, that voices united could ensure the boy's safety. The officer's demeanor started to change. The unwavering confidence he had displayed at the beginning of the incident began to falter. He realized that the situation had grown far beyond his control. The presence of two highly respected figures, coupled with the watchful eyes of neighbors and cameras recording every detail, made it clear that his actions were being judged not only by those present, but by countless others watching from afar. The power dynamic had shifted, and the boy's freedom was now within reach. The boy's parents watched, their hearts swelling with relief at seeing Cena and the Rock. They felt that their child was finally in safe hands, that there were people who understood the severity of the situation and would ensure that justice was served. They spoke softly to their son, telling him that everything would be okay, that help was here. The boy tried to believe them, his small body still trembling, but a growing sense of hope warmed his heart. The crowd continued to observe, some taking videos, others simply watching silently. Everyone felt that they were witnessing something extraordinary, that the intervention of Cena and the Rock was not only helping the boy but also teaching the community about the importance of courage, advocacy, and compassion. The scene had transformed from a frightening and chaotic event into a moment of inspiration, showing that even in difficult circumstances, help can arrive in unexpected ways. The officer finally seemed to recognize the error of his actions. He looked at the boy, at the parents, at the growing crowd, and at the two men standing before him. It was clear that continuing to hold the child tied to the pole was no longer an option. Cena and the Rock continued to speak calmly, ensuring that the officer understood the seriousness of the situation and the need to act immediately to release the boy. The boy's relief began to grow. He felt the tension slowly lifting, the ropes no longer a symbol of fear but a reminder that people cared enough to step in and protect him. His parents moved closer, their presence a comforting anchor amidst the uncertainty. The neighbors, still concerned, could now witness a positive turn in the situation, a step toward resolution and safety. The scene around the boy began to change. The crowd's anxiety eased slightly, replaced with anticipation and cautious hope. People whispered to one another, sharing the sense that something important was happening, that the intervention of Cena and the Rock was not just about the boy but about standing up for what was right. The atmosphere was charged, but with a sense of unity and purpose. The boy, finally beginning to feel a glimmer of safety, looked up at the two men who had stepped in to help him. He saw kindness in their eyes, strength in their stance, and a promise that he would soon be free. The fear that had gripped him since being tied to the pole slowly began to loosen its hold. He realized that even in the darkest moments help could arrive, and that courage and compassion could come in many forms. As the evening sun began to cast long shadows on the street, the boy's story was becoming known far and wide. People watching online, neighbors on the street, and those who had heard of the incident from afar were all connected by the image of a child being rescued from an unfair situation. It was a powerful reminder that the actions of a few brave and compassionate individuals could inspire hope and change, even in moments that seemed hopeless. By the time the first steps toward releasing the boy were taken, the entire scene had shifted. What had begun as an incident of fear and injustice had turned into a story of courage, intervention, and hope. The boy, still tied but safe in the presence of two heroes and the support of his parents and community, could finally begin to imagine freedom. The tension remained, but it was now mixed with a powerful sense of relief and anticipation for the next steps that would bring justice and safety. In that moment, the boy understood that sometimes help comes from unexpected places, that even when the world seems unfair, there are people willing to step in and make a difference. He held on to that thought, knowing that the ordeal was not yet over, but confident that he was no longer alone. The presence of John Cena and The Rock, along with the unwavering support of his family and neighbors, had changed everything, giving him hope that the ropes would soon be untied and that justice would prevail. The air around the boy was tense as John Cena and The Rock stood firmly beside him, their presence commanding the attention of everyone in the neighborhood. The crowd had grown larger, with neighbors, parents, and even people from nearby streets watching carefully, waiting to see what would happen next. The boy's parents held his hands, their faces pale but filled with hope, knowing that the two men who had arrived meant serious help was at hand. John Cena spoke calmly but firmly to the officer, reminding him that this was a child, not an adult, and that tying him to a pole was not acceptable. His words carried weight both in authority and empathy. The boy listened closely, feeling a sense of relief that someone was speaking for him, someone who could ensure he would soon be free. Cena emphasized that there was a way to correct mistakes without causing fear, and that this situation needed to be resolved peacefully and immediately. The Rock added his voice, powerful and commanding, yet filled with compassion. He addressed the crowd first, encouraging them to remain calm, to support the boy without adding tension to the situation. Then he turned his attention to the officer, explaining that accountability was essential, and that releasing the boy would be the first step toward rectifying the harm done. The boy felt a warmth in his chest as he realized that the men weren't just demanding his release, they were also making sure everyone understood why it was necessary. The officer's stance began to shift slightly. He had expected resistance from the crowd, but not from two influential and respected figures who were insisting on the child's safety. The tension in his face softened as he glanced around, realizing that the public attention and the moral weight of the situation left him little choice. He started untying the boy slowly, almost reluctantly, but the sight of his small hands being freed brought tears to the boy's eyes. Once the ropes were removed, the boy rubbed his wrists, feeling relief wash over him. His parents hugged him tightly, whispering words of comfort and reassurance. He looked up at Cena and The Rock, gratitude shining in his eyes, and nodded silently. For the first time since the incident began, he felt a true sense of safety. The crowd began to cheer softly, not just for the boy's release, but for the bravery and compassion that had intervened to protect him. Cena and The Rock continued to speak to the officer, ensuring that he understood the importance of reflecting on his actions. They emphasized that children should never be treated with unnecessary harshness, and that authority comes with responsibility. The officer listened, his expression showing a mix of shame and realization. The presence of the two men ensured that this was not just a moment of release, but also a moment of learning and accountability. The boy's parents thanked Cena and The Rock repeatedly, their voices filled with relief and emotion. They expressed their gratitude not only for the immediate help, but also for the moral support and guidance provided to the officer. The two men reassured them that the situation was being handled appropriately and that the child's well-being was now the priority. Their calm and confident demeanor helped the parents feel secure and optimistic about the next steps. Neighbors continued to watch, some recording the interaction, others simply observing in silence. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of unity and relief. The community had witnessed a frightening event, but they had also seen courage, empathy, and intervention in action. The boy, now free, was at the center of this moment, his small frame a symbol of resilience and hope. He walked slightly unsteadily as he stood beside his parents, holding on to their hands for support. As the discussion with the officer continued, Cena and The Rock emphasized that justice and compassion could coexist. They explained that holding someone accountable did not have to involve fear or punishment that caused harm. The officer nodded, beginning to understand that his actions had consequences beyond the immediate moment. The boy, sensing the shift, felt a growing sense of relief and trust that the situation was moving in the right direction. The boy's parents took a moment to comfort him fully, speaking softly about bravery and resilience. They explained that sometimes adults make mistakes, but there are always people willing to step in and correct those mistakes. The boy listened, absorbing the reassurance and love, feeling the weight of fear lifting from his shoulders. The presence of Cena and the Rock had not only ensured his release but also provided a model of kindness and advocacy that he would remember for the rest of his life. The crowd began to disperse slowly, the tension easing, though the conversation with the officer continued. People spoke quietly among themselves, reflecting on what they had witnessed. Some expressed admiration for the way the two men had handled the situation, balancing firmness with compassion. Others discussed how important it was to protect children and stand up when something was wrong. The boy, still holding his parents' hands, listened to these discussions and felt reassured that the community cared deeply about him and about preventing similar situations in the future. The officer, now fully aware of the public attention and the moral weight of the situation, agreed to follow up with his superiors and face appropriate consequences. He apologized to the boy and his family, acknowledging that his actions had been extreme and unnecessary. The boy, still processing the emotions of the day, accepted the apology quietly, his heart lighter now that the immediate danger had passed. Cena and the Rock nodded, satisfied that the situation was moving toward resolution and that the boy was safe. The boy's parents took a few steps forward, holding him close as they spoke to neighbors and onlookers about the importance of standing together to protect children. Their voices carried hope and determination, inspiring those around them. The crowd listened respectfully, many nodding in agreement, realizing that this incident had highlighted not only a failure in judgment, but also the power of community, advocacy, and intervention. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the street, the boy and his parents prepared to leave. Cena and the Rock offered a few final words of encouragement, reminding the boy that courage and hope could overcome fear, and that there would always be people willing to help when someone was in need. The boy felt a deep sense of gratitude, understanding that the support he had received was extraordinary, and that he had witnessed something that would stay with him forever. The crowd gradually dispersed, the neighborhood returning to a sense of calm. Though the story of the day would not be forgotten, the boy walked beside his parents, feeling safe and loved, reflecting on the events and the unexpected heroes who had appeared. Cena and the Rock stayed for a few moments longer, ensuring the family was ready to leave and that the officer had understood the lessons of the day. Their presence, steady and reassuring, had transformed a frightening experience into a moment of learning, compassion, and hope. The boy's experience had been harrowing, but it had also been a powerful lesson in courage, intervention, and the importance of speaking up. He realized that even in the face of fear and uncertainty, there are people willing to stand up for what is right, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The day had tested him, but it had also shown him the strength of community, the power of kindness, and the impact of heroes acting not for fame, but for justice and compassion. As night approached, the boy and his parents left the street, feeling a mix of relief, gratitude, and reflection. The incident had ended, but its lessons and the memory of bravery, empathy, and intervention would stay with them forever. The boy knew that he had experienced something extraordinary, and that the presence of John Cena and the Rock had not only saved him from immediate danger, but had also shown him what it meant to have courage, hope, and faith in humanity. The boy walked home with his parents, holding tightly to their hands, still processing everything that had happened. The ropes, the fear, and the way strangers had gathered around him replayed in his mind like a movie he could not pause. But now he also remembered the faces of John Cena and the Rock, the calm and strength in their voices, the way they stood up for him when he could not stand up for himself. That memory made him feel safe and protected in a way he had never felt before. The neighborhood, though quieter now, had not forgotten. People talked about the events of the day, sharing their own experiences and feelings. They reflected on how easily fear and misunderstanding could turn a simple afternoon into something frightening and unfair. Yet they also spoke about hope, courage, and the importance of acting with kindness. Many felt a new sense of responsibility to look out for children, to speak up when something was wrong, and to make sure that no child would feel as helpless as the boy had felt. News of the incident spread further, reaching more people online and through media reports. The story sparked discussions about fairness, authority, and how adults should treat children. It became an example of the power of intervention, showing that even small acts of courage could create meaningful change. The boy, though young, had become the center of a larger conversation about justice, empathy, and community responsibility. His experience was shared by many, not as a tragedy but as a lesson in the importance of standing up for what is right. At home, the boy's parents took extra care to comfort him. They spoke softly about bravery and resilience, reminding him that what happened was not his fault. They praised him for staying calm under pressure and reassured him that they would always protect him. The boy listened, absorbing the warmth and love, feeling his fear gradually fade. The safety of his home, combined with the support of his parents, helped him begin to heal from the frightening ordeal he had endured. Over the following days, the boy's story continued to attract attention. People reached out to offer support, sharing messages of encouragement and gratitude. Many expressed admiration for the courage he had shown, even when he was afraid. The story inspired conversations about how society should care for children, how neighbors and communities can act as protectors, and how heroes, even unexpected ones, can make a difference in real life. It became clear that the boy's experience was not just a personal journey, but also a symbol of the importance of compassion and advocacy. Cena and The Rock, who had stepped in to help, continued to use their platforms to speak about the incident. They shared messages about the importance of standing up for the vulnerable, of protecting children, and of acting with empathy. They reminded the public that courage could take many forms, and that even ordinary people could be heroes when they chose to help those in need. The boy's parents were grateful for this, knowing that the story would reach more people and inspire positive change. The officer involved faced the consequences of his actions. His superiors reviewed the situation carefully, acknowledging the mistake and ensuring that appropriate measures were taken. The boy's parents felt some relief knowing that accountability was part of the resolution. The officer's apology, combined with the guidance he received from Cena and The Rock, provided a moment of learning and reflection. While the incident had caused fear and distress, it had also created an opportunity for understanding, education, and growth.